Good evening. You're listening to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Tonight, Xtreme TV is our episode. We're doing Twin Peaks Season 2, Episode 8. I'm here joined by Professor Pixel on the first watch-along and review of this 1990 cult classic show by David Lynch, Mark Frost. Here we have an interesting situation, Pixel, where we seem to know who the killer is, and it's a spirit entity named Bob, where there's another spirit entity named Mike, who's inhabiting the body, or rather easily inhabits the body of the one-armed man, Philip Gerard, who's in custody. Yet somehow we see Leland Palmer being involved as the one that may have actually killed her, allegedly, but we're trying to be definitive about it because there's a who killed who first. We get a death at the end of the last episode with Maddie. Very brutal scene, very graphic, done very well. Left the episode on a very dark note here. This is where I think the episode starts to branch off for Twin Peaks in a different way, where we have allegedly the murder of Laura Palmer being solved, but yet we're introducing another one, even though we know who kills her. And so where the hell are we going to go from this? And we get some new side characters too. So this is where I think season 2 really starts to pivot and all that. What's your initial take on this episode?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure I exactly agree with that. Because I really did enjoy this episode. Obviously, things have amped up to such a point in the last episode that we're trying to see what happens next. And we instantly start off with the events of last night. We can hear like a cry for help, and there's this weird warble in the air that tends to be done with the sound. And we hear a thud, and we know what that thud is. We saw it last episode.
Yeah.
Then morning comes. It's really disturbing right off the bat.
Yeah.
Because what we see are balls being like flung around, and Leland standing there hitting them.
It's, the executive golf thing was always a thing, and golf has lost its popularity since, I'd say, the mid-2000s, even though Tiger Woods has brought a lot of people to golf over the past 25 years or so. But I will tell you that a lot of executives I knew at the time had little putting greens in their office and at home, and so he's chipping away there too. And it's interesting because the way I took the scene, there's two things I took out of it. One was that, to your point, the way you described it, we remember the brutality in the ending of the last episode with Maddie just getting the shit in her face busted wide open by him. We didn't know what's going to happen with it, but we kind of liked her, didn't hate her, but she was a somewhat prominent character that just looks like she's dead now. And the thud that you hear, you're like, what is that? Is he still working on her? Is he doing something else? Is he cutting her up? I mean, you don't know, because your mind's instantly left in a dark frame. And then here, it's something that's kind of ironic. It's a upper class, rich sports sort of thing to do, but you hear all of a sudden, you don't know it till you see him. But it's setting the foundation for other golf scenes later in this episode, which are prominent and kind of funny and interesting all at the same time. So I think it's good. It's better set up than when you first see it. But the second thing I wanted to ask you about this was that the thing that bothered me at the end of the last episodes wasn't Maddie being beaten to death by her father, or her, by Leland. Yeah, her uncle. What really stood out to me in this particular opening scene was that his wife, we saw her kind of like struggling down the stairs, like pulling herself or whatever, when the whole thing was going on. And then this episode here, when James comes over and they're looking for her, and he's like, well, she went home and all that. We know that Bob is kind of in his body, not in his body, and there's the struggle going on. We see that in this episode. We saw at the end of the last episode in this one, so we surmise that's what's going on. But for a split second, she calls him up the stairs, and he goes up. You don't hear anything, and then he just comes back down and deals with that. And I was kind of like not quite sure what was going on, but with everything that's going on in the action, when you go back and you look at it, I'm going, I don't really get what's going on here with James and Donna and him. I know he's basically saying, oh, you can write to her or whatever like that, and he's brushing them off. But the whole thing with his wife, I'm going, I don't know. It just feels like something's weird because she didn't look like she was beaten,
Yeah.
but yet there's something going. It was kind of bizarre. I don't know how else to explain it. What was your take on that?
Yeah, no, exactly. She's up there and she calls him up. And whenever he's coming down, he has this grave look upon his face. But then he does the finger to the cheek and just flicks on a smile and goes back to James and Donna, acting like everything's okay. Yes, you can ride her. She's fine. I just dropped her off at the station. And we know that Bob is in there after he gets Donna and James to leave because it shows him at a mirror and we see Bob's face staring back at him.
Good. It's really good acting by this guy in this episode, not just the scene, but I mean, he really, when he was called upon to deliver, he's definitely delivered the goods. I was impressed by it.
Yeah. And this is the most disturbing part of this entire opening is when he goes, he's heading out and his wife says, don't forget to sign up at the club.
Glenn Miller.
That's right. And he's
Old
like,
people know that name.
I won't forget. And he picks up this bag that he stuffed his
golf club
into.
Yeah.
And he just carries it out to the trunk of his car. And we saw her hand. Maddie's in there. And
it's kind of funny in a way. I like it. How do I get rid of the body? I'll take it out to put it in my golf bag. And I just go, what's happening with his wife, Sarah? Because, we've seen her grief-stricken, and that's her role, basically. It's not a big role, but we see her prominently being the mother of Laura Palmer, and she just seems catatonic, Is it that age-old woman constantly, back then where they would say, oh, she's just so distraught, she's, not going to be present or what? I don't know. It's just the whole old school golf thing kind of pops with me because it makes sense, especially at the time that they filmed this. We cut to that to, some little bit lighthearted scene where we see Ben in jail there. Of course, he was arrested on the suspicion of murdering Laura, which we know he did not do, even though he's a bit of a bastard, but Ben's there. And Jerry, Ben and Jerry's there. And I guess Jerry's actual legitimate lawyer. I just thought he was a tag-along guy when they went to One-Eyed Jacks and were dealing with drugs and hookers and stuff. All this does is really introduce the idea that Ben admits being with Catherine when Laura died. And, this next, the part of the scene is kind of like a Lynchian sort of thing or whatever, where they talk about what it was like, when they were young, about this little girl, Louise, dancing in a room with the flashlight. And then they actually show for like 30 seconds this little girl kind of dancing with the flashlight. And little girl, I mean like preteen, not little girl for all you weirdos out there. And it's just something that they both remembered. And it kind of explains both of them being indoctrinated into perhaps this world of enjoying women a bit more than the average guy, I guess, because they seem to have a healthy appetite with each other when it comes to things, to the point where it gets a bit perverted, obviously. But it's kind of funny. I pop when, you see them in little kids, they got their bunk beds, but they got like their dress shirts on and their bow ties and their wire rimmed glasses, and the little girl's in her thing. And it's just like a shadowy figure. But that's something Lynch would do, is give you something like this or draw it out and take a long time to do and all that. But for me, I kind of care less what's going on with Ben. I think Ben's a smart guy, but Jerry's annoying because he's that annoying guy in like Commando and all these other 80s types movies. So it's hard for me to buy him as a lawyer. So this is a little thin feeling to me. What's your take?
Yeah, no. And as we'll come to see, he's just a fool. He's been a fool the entire time, but he just goes ahead and proves that he's such a fool. Speaking about fools, that reminds me of the next scene, because Lucy's back.
Mm-hmm.
And she's brought her sister Gwen with her, and her sister Gwen has a baby. And they're in the station, and they run into Hawk. Lucy asks like where Andy is, and actually, does she ask where Dale is? It might be that. But Gwen instantly, like the loudmouth she instantly goes, "Oh, I heard about you. You're the native, like Eagle Eye or something." when Lucy just said Hawk. And Gwen goes on and says, "Oh, Hawk, well, you must hate us white people and what we did to your people." And Hawk takes a moment, looks at her, and says, "Some of my best friends are white people." And that's pretty much the scene.
Yeah, it introduces obviously a side character because we don't know what's going on here. It's drawing out the whole who's the baby daddy sort of thing. That's the term we would use these days, especially from the sports world. Women that choose to get pregnant themselves with money people to get as much money as they can out of them, usually athletes and stuff. It's a generic term, but Lynch just does his own thing, and whether you're liberal, conservative, libertarian, agnostic, religious, I don't really care. I think when you watch an episode like this, somebody young watching this for the first time would come across the line where she says, "You must hate us white people after all we've done to you." And my first thought was, when I saw this, when it originally aired, it really wasn't a thing. Just like growing up, I was and still am a big fan of the Washington Redskins, now named the Washington football team because of all the political correctness out there. And no matter what your stance is when it comes to politics or what you think of the colonization of America and everything else too, this really wasn't a big deal. And Hawk never showed himself to be an incompetent character or needed special treatment or anything else. He seems to have a grip on the spiritual side of Twin Peaks, or at least introduced that in some of the observations he had. So I thought he was good as a minor character. And so I'm looking at Gwen here making these comments going, why is this being put in here? I think more people would actually today have an issue with that sort of comment, because the whole idea of Lucy running out and getting an abortion was a much bigger deal 30 years ago in terms of culture, where now, some people may argue, my body, my choice. And again, not trying to get this into any sort of politics, but to put this on primetime television on a huge hit show, this was, even though for us watching it, it may seem like a small side angle that they're just drawing out because they can with Deputy Dumbass and, whatever, however we want to call Lucy. It just kind of stood out to me, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but the kid's cute. The daughter's the sister's a chatterbox. I get it. But in terms of TV, it's a nice way just to introduce another side character, put another side characters like Hawk and Lucy back in for whatever reason and do that. But I will say this. I'd mentioned to you before that around, episode 7, 8, 9, we're on episode 8 currently, is when things started to kind of tank for Twin Peaks because of ABC's insistence that they basically say, you got to tell the audience who that is. Who the killer is. You can't drag them out along. And David Lynch really hates season 2, thinks it's dopey and stupid. He was only involved in the first few episodes and the last couple to tie things up. So a lot of these episodes may start to drift into different areas because of the writing and everything else there too. And on that note, I kept going, I keep seeing this name. We all know who Zoe Deschanel is, but the person who directed this was, I guess, her father, who is involved in several of these episodes too. So just a little small inside thing for you people that like her and all that. And I don't find her offensive, but I don't really find her like, she's obviously in the industry and has had some success. So just take that for what it is. But I've said too much, sir, about a very small scene. It's not worth it. So let's move on.
No, you make some excellent points. I can definitely see where that would be. I'm just glad I'm glad what Hawk went ahead and said, no, some of my best friends are white people, so I'm okay.
Certainly classy way to handle it. Absolutely, Hawk is. Yeah.
Yep. And speaking of his white best friends, we cut to Dale. He's talking to Diane with Harry at his side. And they're walking through the lodge, the Great Northern Lodge. It seems that Gerard is not doing too good. The last time we saw him, he was freaking out on the floor whenever Ben entered the room. And he apparently, it's so bad that they say what's left of him. So I'm at this moment, I was thinking that he's probably just catatonic himself. But we see Leland here, and he's just dancing through the lobby, and Harry says that he wants to go ahead and he wants to tell Leland that they arrested Ben, and they do. Leland acts upset, but says, "Oh, the law will handle it if he killed Laura," and then he goes off to be alone. And he's making it like he's crying, but then as soon as everybody's not around him, he's laughing. I think Cooper catches that something's a little off. Even though Leland has been an off character this entire time, something's a little off. He goes ahead and goes to check on Leland. And Leland's doing this laugh cry thing. It's not enough that you can clearly tell it's a ha ha ha, but
it's tremendous. It's good. It's quite the inner struggle. It's great. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, and once Cooper's over there, Leland turns around, and Cooper's just saying that we basically wanted to check on him, make sure he's okay, and he says he's going to be fine, and Cooper goes back to Harry, and then Leland is just dancing with his club in hand in the small archway. It is very we know that Bob is in there, and I just wonder how long Bob's been in control.
Well, that's a good question, and I think that's obviously something we have to do or figure out, because we're assuming that Bob, while inhabiting Mr. Palmer's body here, was the reason why Laura died, but we'll see specifically, I imagine, here pretty soon, especially since we know Ben's not really the one that did it. So it's like, okay, now we just need the details. What's tremendous about this entire scene, like I say, this guy did a great acting job in this episode. He owns this episode, because there's two separate things to me going on in this episode. One, when they're coming around and they talk about what's left of the one-armed man, of course, I think they mean emotionally, spiritually, that he's a broken individual with what's going on, because the spirit, Mike, is inhabiting him, who happens to know Bob. And so we know we're having to deal with spirits. And if you're a police fan of the material world, but we don't know exactly anything else. But as they're walking to the scene, which is, kind of a goofy, happy scene, I'm not unhappy. It's in sharp contrast to the depth of what they're talking about, because when Cooper's talking to Diane, he's basically saying, hey, in a past life, he may have been like a seer, a shaman, a priest, a holy figure type thing with his ability to see things. But he says in this world, he's just like a shoe salesman. And you're like, oh, that's kind of funny, the irony of it, building the guy up, make him sound important and whatever. But on another level, to me, because of what Hawk has introduced and what we've actually seen with Two Spirits, this is basically confirming to us, the viewer, that there's a supernatural element that is definitely involved here in Twin Peaks. We don't know the metaphysical nature of how this is going to play out, but we see the physical struggle here on Leland's face as he's going through stuff, because he's Fred Astaireing it up. And back in the day, you're one of two camps. You're part of the cultured, high-class, elite Fred Astaire, very laid-back kind of guy, who, while I can appreciate, I was in the other camp. I was in the athletic, by your bootstraps, physicality nature of a Gene Kelly, who's got the best smile ever in Hollywood, in my opinion. But he, even early on, while he's singing and dancing, he does the chair thing where he's holding the golf club, and he just, jumps on the chair and has the chair fall down in slow motion as he's dancing around and stuff. And again, to your point, you mentioned how when he walks away, you can see the struggle on his face and all that too, because he even mentions, a guy we've almost seemingly forgotten about, even though it's only been a little over 2 weeks, technically, with the amount of episodes and into the storyline of Jacques Renault thinking he was going to be the killer. So he's planting the spirit as Bob through Leland, the seeds of how to get off scot-free. And that's why I think, of course, he's dancing and happy at the end, plus some other scenes going out. So again, saying a lot for a scene that doesn't take too long, but I think very important, because the actor, again, when you see Cooper in the background saying, hey, if you think anything's amiss, let us know. And he's like, yep, we'll do. He doesn't turn his back, but the guy just gets this great, sweaty, smiling, maniacal look on his face. And it's tremendous. It's another great scene by this actor. but you portray that against the next scene where the town doctor's taking a sample from Ben, and we find out how bad of a lawyer Jerry is too. And it's not a really telling scene, other than Cooper showing the diary of Laura Palmer to him and all that, and Ben's like, yeah, big deal. We don't really give a rat's ass. Let's get on with it. And we know that this is just drawing it out. I mean, as a viewer, because we know he didn't do it. But it's one of those things that it's like, okay, it's filler to me. And this is before we go on to the Bobby scene or whatever. Your take on any of that?
Yeah, no. In fact, I really love that scene for the one moment after they get the blood from Ben. Jerry's acting very upset. He's saying how you can't do this. This is insane. Keeping him here. Then Dale starts just bringing up all the mistakes of Jerry's law career at this time, and as soon as he finishes up, Jerry's like, "Hey, I'm not on trial here." But after they go over the secret diary, Ben's clearly upset, and Jerry asked for a moment. And I don't know if you noticed this line, and I could be overthinking it, but how much of an idiot is Jerry to say that Ben's blood might just have Laura's fingerprints on it? I don't. They're obviously taking the blood to compare it to some that they found at the what was it? The train car?
Yep.
I just don't get the odd phrasing. It just makes him sound like an utter idiot.
Exactly. He's the dipshit brother who's trying to act smarter than he is, and even though he did complete law school, he was last in his class, and he's been barred from practicing several states because he sucks. Which I don't know. I mean, I think he's trying to just communicate. Well, hey, they can use that as a way to do it. And that's why he says you need to find yourself a better lawyer because you're in deep shit. It's like, okay. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, the scene's just sort of there, pocketed by some really great scenes and new characters. Didn't really take too long there. And neither did this next scene where we see Bobby listening to the tape that he found in Leo's shoe that we saw when he knocked off the sole of it, because you've got a catatonic Leo there who we thought originally might have been a bad guy involved, even though he did have relations with Laura on that fateful night of hers. He was just spitting up oatmeal, new shoes, and I guess that's supposed to be funny, but after a bit of time, it's going to start wearing thin here if that's all that happens. But you just see Bobby basically coming up, hatching a plotting and scheming versus saying, oh, I think I can use this as a way to do stuff. And then of course he does what he does best, as well as Shelley. They act like total sluts for each other and start licking and kissing each other while she's got crap all over her face. And it's probably the most wholesome thing on the show, even though it's kind of weird.
Yeah, no, I can't disagree with you there. And instantly after he listens to the tape with Ben and Leo on it, Bobby is planning already what he's going to do next. I guess the town doesn't know that Ben's locked away, but he plans on clearly blackmailing Ben.
Yeah.
And when Shelley comes in and saying that it's Bobby's turn to clean up Leo, Bobby starts going on about, oh, well, you watch it. I have a plan. We're going to be on Easy Street soon. And then they just start talking about the, like young couples can do, just dreaming of the future. Oh, yeah, it's going to be easy. But it is the most wholesome part of this odd show. I do.
It makes sense too. They're young and in lust and all that. Speaking of not being young, but in lust, perhaps, is the next scene, which is pivotal in that it's introducing new characters and new places that the show can go. And while we've seen that already with a side character with Lucy's sister Gwen showing up when Gwen apparently just had a baby, so it's supposed to magnify all the issues Lucy may or may not be having to go through this season. we cut to the diner with Norma, and apparently her mother comes in. Her mother's named Vivian. She's an attractive, well put older lady, classy, the way she carries herself and speaks. They're visiting her. So it's like, oh, this is a good way of doing it without feeling like it's rushed. But the reason why Vivian wanted to meet Norma is so she can introduce her new husband, this guy named Ernie. Ernest is, an old school name too. Who says he's a financial, planner and all that. And it's one of the first, I saw car phones and perhaps cell phones in like Miami Vice in the early 80s. And I definitely saw a few bricks that were a lot bigger in person around the mid 80s. But this being 1990, I think is when this episode aired, late 1990. You see him with what looks to be a cell phone because he basically says, hey, we need to get back to the hotel. I've got a fax waiting for me from Tokyo. My radar's going off. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, is this related to the whole Josie Catherine sort of thing? I don't know. But he just got this sleaze bag look about him. But he seems very genuine. In Norma, when she goes to basically clean up, she's takes the newspaper he had and an insert falls out and he's got written under like $1,000 Houston by 3. So he's playing points. He's got a bookie. So we're like, okay, he's not on the up and up. Okay. He's a gambler. Maybe he's a financial advisor and a gambler. Two things can be true. But the other thing that really went off to me is how Vivian first met Norma, because a guy in there who's like this constant customer, the dude with the beard, he's a nobody, but we just see him if you watch the show a lot. He's getting ready to eat. Looks like some meatloaf, some mashed potatoes, and I think carrots. And it's a good looking plate. I gotta say, the double R looks like it serves up a nice plate of food. But Vivian says, excuse me, and she takes a separate fork. She goes, well, you can't use flakes. And she takes them. She's like, those are good. I go, wait a minute. Wasn't there a whole thing about a food critic coming to town? Is Vivian going to be the food critic? But damn it, this is what Lynch does. He puts stuff in there that drags on too long, like the golf scene at the beginning, like this that might be a swerve. I don't know what to think, but I like this scene a little bit. I like the way how they introduce these characters.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That entire scene where she's taking, I believe his name's Toad, Toad's potatoes. And later on during that scene, Norma brings up the fact that there's a food critic coming. That's why, and I believe Vivian says, oh, so that's why you dress the place up nice. And I'm thinking maybe she could be the food critic.
Yeah, Tojimura is not going to get me anymore. Neither is anybody else. That's my promise to you. But yeah.
Well, at least this time she isn't wearing a disguise.
Yeah.
We do get to cut from this scene though to the mentally shaken man we spoke about before, Mr. Gerard, otherwise known as the body of Mike. We see him in bed and he's saying how he's close. And there's this nurse there watching him. And he turns to her and asks for a glass of water. The nurse goes ahead and she's like, okay. And after she leaves, the officer that was stationed outside of his room enters. And he turns and he doesn't see him on the bed. But Mr. Gerard, or Mike, as we know him, just wallops the guy from behind and says how he's sorry before just getting the hell out of there.
I don't know when it started, but cops looking like dipshits. I mean, you go back to Benny Hill from the 70s, perhaps, a show from England that was kind of funny for its time, would not be made today. Definitely British humor. Little waka wakas in there, especially the ending and the music. But in here, Philip Gerard's, he's on watch, and the guy's a dipshit cop, and rightly so, doesn't check his blind spot walking in and everything else, so he deserves it. But here's the thing that gets me about this. I go, wait a minute. Okay, we have these two spirits that talk about knowing each other, and really, it's only the spirit here, and that's Mike, who mentioned to him when how do you want to say it? When Gerard was in his fugue state, when he's currently at the moment being possessed, he talked a little bit about some of the rules about how he had met Bob, and he'd given him some stuff, and we're like, well, wait a minute, this is a significant moment. Several episodes ago, I don't even remember, it might have been the beginning of the season. The part that I go, wait a minute, if they are acquaintances and they know each other, maybe there's more than two different spirits or types of spirits, because of course Mike doesn't seem to be the violent one, but Bob does. And so of course we see here Gerard, who I think is not being possessed at the time, escape, because I think he's trying to go hunt down Bob. So it's like, you have two spirits in this not other world, because it's in our world here, but it looks like Mike is trying to chase down Bob. And I'm going, well, what for? He knows Bob's extremely violent. How can he really chase him down? I'm kind of trying to understand the motivations about it, because they're spirits. They're not of this earth per se. I mean, they know things we don't, and we know there's all this talk about giants and dreams and goofy ass shit here too, that it seems like Cooper's got something, and some others even, actually. Sarah Palmer, remember, as well as Maddie, saw Bob, so they're able to see the spirit world. So some people can, but it's just introducing a dynamic with them going, okay, why is he trying to escape? Isn't he really the safest there? But I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
No, he's always wanted to handle himself. He's always wanted to go after Bob on his own. Mike, anyway. Gerard just wants to be himself. He doesn't like being possessed. But Dale has basically forced him to be, and now I don't think Mike's going to give up the body anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying here out of the scene is I'm going for it. I may be wrong. I think it's Gerard that escaped, not Mike inhabiting Gerard.
Okay. I thought it was Mike, but
and the reason why I say that is because, and I can't be wrong on this, I'm gonna have to pay more attention to it going forward if we're gonna see Gerard more, is that whenever Gerard seemed to be possessed, they throw on that special effect, that reverb thing, where it sounds like he's in a shower or something, and his voice sounds a lot different. And here he says basically like, oh, I'm sorry for doing this or whatever, when he hits the cop over the head or whatever. And so that's my kind of like, as a watcher, cue for, okay, when Mike's inhabiting Gerard's body and he's possessing him, his voice is going to be different. And here he sounds like a normal human. So that's just my way of taking it, and it may be just, I don't know. That's just my take on it. So we'll see what happens there. It's not an argument; it's just an observation. After this, we go right back to the diner, because Hank comes in, and Norma gives him the cold shoulder because he's been missing for a couple of days or whatever, and he does another really good job of basically trying to sweet talk her down. But this guy's, he's not slick or smooth, but he is a bullshit artist, so he's a pro at doing it and knowing how to work Norma. But Norma, you can tell, kind of almost likes it, and Norma's like this wall of non-emotion. So to see a dent in her arm, or even when her mom comes in, or anybody else that we've seen, especially when Shelley said she had to quit or take time off, maybe that's just the way the actress is, don't know. But Vivian and Hank seem to obviously know each other, and Hank charms Vivian, who happens to still be there, but behind the counter helping out a little bit. And then, of course, they just mentioned that they're going to have dinner later, so we know we're going to see more of them. After that, they cut to a scene that I don't know what to make of, where Harry's in the office with Pete, and Pete basically says, yeah, Josie left, I loved her, and he mentions Mr. Lee, and Harry's like, oh, you mean Jonathan or whatever. They get him kind of confused, but they both surmise it's the same person. And then Cooper has to leave because he heard about Gerard escaping, basically. And of course, Andy walks in and faints because he sees Lucy carrying Gwen's baby, and he faints because again, at this point, we don't care about Andy. But the thing that I was going, okay, it's like a non sequitur here, just a thing to throw you in there. Harry's looking out his office with binoculars, like, oh, who's he watching? He's just watching a bird. I'm like, yep, okay, that's cool, that's fine.
Yeah, but this scene instantly becomes one of my favorites. One of my favorite, just the entire sheriff's office at this point. We get to see Pete. He's always nice to see. But the best part is after Harry has to go to Gerard and Andy passes out, okay, we see Pete go back to the cell where Ben is currently laying. And Pete just starts dying with laughter and says that he has a message for him. And he takes out this tape recorder and he presses play. And we hear Catherine. On this entire time, it's a little hard to hear because Pete is laughing the entire time, but he deserves it. So I will let it pass. And Ben is like, what the hell does she want? And she goes ahead and answers on the tape. She wants the entire Ghostwood project. And that since she's feeling generous, she just might leave him his hotel. But otherwise, she's just going to stay gone. And he can go on trial for Laura's murder. And Pete he's having a hell of a time. He turns it off after, and he leaves, which causes Ben to just freak out, throwing pillows and the top mattress, and feathers are flying.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something I haven't said before in all the reviews we've done. I think this is a horrible scene, and there's a couple reasons why. Yeah, I do. The whole idea, obviously, here is that Pete is going to be the go-between between Catherine and Ben here, and with the whole Ghostwood projects thing with Josie and all that, and that's fine. That's cool. It's developing like the other things are too, and it's neat to see Pete, who's somebody, to your point, where we like, and we go, yeah, we know he loves his wife. She shits on him. Yeah, he's a good guy. Yeah, somebody to root for. Yeah. But here's my big problem with the scene. Two things. One's a minor one. When Ben loses it, he overdoes it. He's trying to pull stuff down. The feathers are flying. It's almost funny rather than, okay, he's really pissy because he's a smart guy. I guess he feels he's got, and he has to deal with this. But here's where the whole thing's stupid. We know as a watcher he didn't do it. Okay? Whether he's with Catherine or not. We just know he didn't do it. So part of us goes, yeah, whatever. We know that whatever this role is going to turn out for him, he's a smart guy. So he's got to know that the case is a little weak, even though if he's panicking a little bit here. He seems to be more disturbed about Catherine getting one over on him rather than enjoying every scene we've seen with him before where he's enjoyed being played, because he seems to enjoy that intellectual challenge, that stimulation of somebody else trying to put one over him. A crook knows a crook and how to play a crook sort of thing. And we've seen it with Josie. We've seen it with Catherine. He gets off on that and really admires it. So his reaction to me is completely not in character. But the big problem I have with the scene is not even that. It's the fact that I understand what Catherine's trying to do. My problem is with Pete and the way they wrote this. My problem with this is that, okay, Pete, you're a nice guy. You're a schlub that decided to stay, with this woman who decided to, I guess, not divorce you for whatever reason, because she obviously hates your guts. You decide to live with that and put up with it. And I guess there's a certain amount of that you can deal with. And Piper Laurie, who's played Catherine, has done such a fantastic job with it. I really am interested in her character and her, even though she's kind of evil, like a lot of people are in this episode, and they have two sides. So we do understand her. But my problem is okay, she played Toji Mura to get stuff over. I popped huge for that. And then it was kind of interesting to see her kind of come back and reveal herself to Pete. And, he misses her and they kiss or whatever. But all of a sudden, since the last scene that we've seen, which is that Toji Mura reveal as Catherine, that somehow Pete wants to be with a woman that nearly died and Josie left, and that's the one he really was pining for. It doesn't make sense to me that you're going to help the woman that hates your guts and is having an affair with somebody and you know about it and who's an evil bastard, that you're going to help her out and get one over on him. That doesn't make sense to me at all, writing-wise. I'm looking at it going, why would he enjoy doing this? He knows he's being a pawn. Is he just happy because Catherine's showing him a little bit of attention and affair? He looked like a guy who's just saying, screw it, my wife's whatever she is. I'm just going to go fishing. I'm old. I don't care anyway. And just seemed to get along with everybody else in town and be that guy. So to me, I had a major issue with this. It did not seem realistic at all.
No, I'm going to have to disagree, because it goes back to the last season where Pete and Catherine, they've patched things up. They know what each other has. Well, not each other. They both know what she's done. And while yes, she's turned him into somewhat of a pawn, she seemed genuinely happy, and I saw no sign of anything otherwise when she got to finally reveal herself to Pete. I think he was helping Josie because he didn't want her to end up screwed out of everything, which Catherine was absolutely trying to do. But Josie's gone. Josie's left. And she's living on easy street elsewhere, I guess. Catherine
Well,
is
maybe.
Catherine's his girl, and the fact that he gets to play the message this entire time, the affair, it was she was being played, and Ben's freaking out isn't because of, I don't take it as overacting. He does enjoy the challenge that, like how Josie did in just the last episode or the episode before. But this has shaken him completely because his only way out, his only alibi is the fact that he was having an affair that night with Catherine. And to everybody else, other than Pete and Ben, right in that moment, Catherine's dead. She's gone. His only way out of this case going to court, which, while it might seem weak, the whole emotional factor that's going to come into play, it's pretty damning right there in that diary that they didn't know about.
Circumstantial at best, and it's not even close enough to prove anything. I totally disagree with you on this one. It's a weak case. He's smart enough, I would think, to see that. And maybe he's emotionally pissed because he got caught. And of course, yeah, he's overreacting because Catherine got him. But yeah, we'll see how this plays out. Obviously, it's a big deal. But to me, let's just see where this goes. Okay. We either one of us could be wrong or neither, or it's just the way they chose to
have
go.
more information.
Right. And again, the show gets weird. We'll see what happens, I think, because I actually think this next scene is one of the best scenes in this episode. We get to where we see Leland, and he's driving the top down convertible, and it's funny too, because like you say, he put his golf bag in the trunk, and it's got the body in it of Maddie, wrapped in plastic, of course. She's dead, wrapped in plastic. Thank you, Pete. He's swerving all over the road, and he's going out to like golf club. It seems like he is. Of course, it looks like he may be disposing of the body. I don't know, but he's singing this song or whatever about geese on a Surrey or whatever. And the interesting thing is if like
from Oklahoma, Surrey with the fringe on top.
Oh, okay, there you go, from Oklahoma. But here's the thing. Cooper and Truman are driving because they're looking for Gerard.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I'm going to go back to the scene a couple scenes ago where I said it was interesting about Cooper mentioning the spirit world, basically, the irony of Gerard, and that, another world, another time or place, he might be considered like a prophet. Because while you've got Bob, who's inhabiting Palmer, Leland, is driving around, swerving on the road, coming from the opposite direction. At this point, they haven't seen each other because they're on this curvy mountain road with Truman and Cooper. Cooper happens to be whistling the same song, like we're saying. So there's some synchronicity here too, and that's not an accident to me that Cooper and, like I say, even Maddie, who's dead now, and Sarah, the mom, some people here can see these spirits. I don't know what the relationship of the people that can see it, but that is definitely a thing that we have to acknowledge. And just a split second before Leland comes around the corner, Cooper stops whistling, and he basically says something along the area, and it's like you don't catch it because everything that happens really quick here in this scene. It's distracting. But he says, hey, are there like driving lessons required by high school, in your town, or what's the thing? And he goes, yeah. Then as soon as he says that, and he turns around, Leland's who's driving is swerving and almost gets hit. And I have to point this out too, because this is a really bad scene, in my opinion. This is supposed to be a Pacific Northwest, right next to Canada. And you can clearly see on the scene where they're cutting back and forth between cars going up this mountain road, which means probably somewhere in California in the mountains. You clearly see several palm trees in various states there too, and I know that because being from Central Florida, like yourself here, just west of Orlando, Florida, Pinellas Palace to be specific, we know what they look like, and it's like, oh, that kind of ruined the immersive nature of the show, even though we know it's not filmed there. But the best part of this is when they pull him over, Bob, who's inhabiting the spirit, puts one over on Cooper, basically saying, oh, I thought I heard something about this. And he says dairy instead of diary because he knows they have the diary. But the best scene is when he says, hey, Cooper, while Truman's taking a call in the car, I'm getting ready to go off. You want to see my clubs? And he goes and he opens up the trunk and he gets the club out like he's going to murder him with the club. I just thought it was so funny. I enjoyed that scene. I don't think it was supposed to be sinister per se, but he, again, the actor doing this is his episode, because he looked like he was literally getting ready to just crack the shit out of him. And as soon as Truman tells Cooper, hey, it's blah blah blah, and they get in the car and take off, and then Leland's left there, you see Bob in the rearview mirror smiling like I can't believe I'm free, I can do anything I want, I can murder people, I can do whatever. So fantastic scene.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. I definitely thought he was going to get a hit on in there if it wasn't for the fact that Harry just calls him over. They have Gerard, and you're absolutely right. I went ahead and marked that down too because he's just whistling that tune, and obviously we know that Leland's singing it. So many close calls in this moment. But it instantly leads into the next, where we see the one-armed man. He was found by the waterfall, apparently, but he's brought into the police station. And there we have to suffer through this next scene with Andy, Lucy, and Gwen. And Gwen's going on about she understands every situation, and men are horrible, and they just want to get their little swimmers out there. And at one point, Andy tells Gwen to just shut up, and Lucy does as well because Gwen's just being utterly annoying, and so she walks off.
It's complete male bashing. It really is. Yeah. Between this and the scene earlier with Hawk, hailing himself with class, I go to 2020, invade 1990. I was like, what the hell is this? I mean, we can argue stuff about how things have infiltrated TV over the past 40, 50 years, starting before the 70s, but definitely by the 70s. And so this just really stood out to me too. It's like, yeah, I get that you're supposed to be the kind of annoying know-it-all sister that might drive these two together in each other's arms, but I'm still not over the fact that Lucy's playing both these guys here and thinking about getting an abortion, and it's not funny, it's not cute, it's not working, and Andy's a dipshit. I mean, there's scenes where we like both of them together being a cute couple. But right now, that the father's departed from being a cute couple and all that too, because he just says sperm a lot, and she doesn't confirm or deny who the father is or whatever. And you're right, we're now suffering watching this angle. You're absolutely right. And he didn't bug me like he bugged you at first, but now I just am going, okay, here you go. Let's bash Andy some more. I don't know.
He is deputy dumbass, and he's trying to say that, I could be the father of the baby, and we hear Lucy going, oh no, and he's like, couldn't I? But then we get to the important stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
We get to see the one-armed man going around in the same room with Ben, and he's saying that Bob is close. He's not here, but he's close. And right there with Ben and Jerry, we hear Mike, who has basically the end. He knows who they're after. He's saying he's not there. But Jerry pushes and says how it's been 48 hours. If you're not charging my client, you need to let us go now. But then Harry takes that and says, we're charging Ben. And he charges him with the murder of Laura Palmer right there. Dale tries to talk to him outside of the room for a moment, and he's saying that this is wrong. I don't think Ben has done it. And Harry, at that moment, says he's done with the giants, the midgets, all the mumbo jumbo.
Yep.
And he has hard evidence that he can push against Ben. And this is what he has to do. And Dale says, okay, I'm sorry. I forget that I'm an outsider here. And he walks off.
Yeah, again, another writing choice that I'm looking at going, okay, we know Truman's feeling pissy because Josie left and all that too. So he's acting like a butthurt 12, 13-year-old with his first crush or something. And, then it seems like the guy we've known to be really competent here, Mr. Cooper, who relies on his instincts more than anything else, maybe some experience, doesn't seem to be the smartest tool in the shed, but as an FBI agent, he's supposed to know something. He seems like he's more interested in being his friend at the time. That's like, okay, too, but these two guys are acting like boys instead of professional men here, and it bothers me. You get, like you said, Mike inhabiting Gerard here in a scene, walk around like a feral animal, and he's got that reverb voice thing going on too. So they should both just stop, and Cooper could have just simply said, we're relying on a supernatural spirit inhabiting a one-armed man to tell us whether or not we got the right guy. Think about that for a moment. And he'd have been more professional and on point with that, despite the fact that that's such a ridiculous statement in this scene here too. So again, to me, I'm looking at this going, they're just dragging this out. It's not a very good scene to me. It really is disappointing to see how they're portraying both of them here too. And I don't hate the scene. I'm not saying it's a bad scene. I'm just saying as a writing choice, I just go, oh, this is why I think this episode, to me, as I mentioned at the beginning, seems to pivot in a couple directions, because we think that Bob is the killer of, Laura via Leland Palmer, her father raping her a lot, which is disgusting. But we're trying to see what this dynamic's going to be, and we're trying to watch these two guys that have been pretty good at the investigation. They haven't been right on everything, but they've moved it along forward at a pretty good rate here. Kind of almost getting an argument over, well, I want to arrest somebody because I just want to, because I'm emotionally invested. And like I say, their case was thin anyway, even by dipshit Jerry's analysis. And we know he's dumb as a box of rocks. So not a big fan of this scene, or writing choice, I should say.
Yeah, well, I disagree. I thought that I could feel the tension, and I
feel it too, but I still think it's a bad writing choice, because everything they've relied on to be successful, which ultimately, if you look back on it, to defend my point, would be that it's been Cooper's visions and control over the non-reality world, his relationships, his visions, all that stuff that we've seen that's been weird, is the only thing that's really driven them forward. Because detective work has led them nowhere. Yes, we have the doctor taking a blood sample. We're going to see if it matches up. AB negative, I want to say, is what it was. So maybe that's a loose thread there too. Because of course, Albert, who was a side character that got brought in several times, was the one that really did all the hardcore work, which allowed them to get some feedback. And we know that took them not necessarily in the wrong direction, but not in the quickest direction that we knew as a viewer. So again, the scene may be done well, but writing choice wise, it's inconsistent. If you rely on all these things to get you to a certain point, and then you change up, we're going to make your decision on it. It doesn't, it's not, I don't know. It doesn't work.
A part of it though, is that Ben has already admitted during one of the, I would suppose interrogation scenes would work, that he was in fact with Laura Palmer.
He said he loved Laura. He didn't say he killed her or anything else like that. He did not.
No, I know that, but I'm saying, I believe it was this episode that they say that Jerry said, you don't admit that. Why would you admit to being with Laura? And Ben is just spiraling right now. So Harry feels that they can absolutely take this, that this is their guy.
Weak sauce.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is TV, so you're going to sometimes you're going to have to give in. Sadly, with Leo, they definitely had more evidence. However, they've taken the supernatural angle, and that's what has pushed them to believe, okay, here's the third man. Other than the the log lady led them to the fact that there was a third man that night that took them. But I don't know. I don't know what they're pushing for, and I think, like you said, Harry is just upset, and he's absolutely a fool for doing this, though. And that's going to lead into a moment later on.
Yeah.
But first, we get dinner with Hank.
Yeah, and I think the way to contrast these two scenes to make my point, thinking about how you just described it, is that we can argue whether or not we like the choice where writing decisions made, and it seems to me in these two scenes I mentioned this episode that choices are being made that go against the grain of the character. And we could say, well, no, not necessarily. Maybe it's nuance. Maybe it's just a one-time thing. Okay, I get that. That's fine. When I think of a scene in writing that's supposed to amount to something, it's basically, you're always building a character in a certain direction. So you're trying to elevate two characters. So in this next scene, which we'll call the dinner scene here, is the dinner scene where we're seeing Ernie and Vivian, Norma's mom, and Hank having dinner at the Double R, because of course, why wouldn't everybody? Oh no, they're at the Great Northern, excuse me, or I believe they're at the Great Northern. Yeah, not the Double R. They're having a nice little sit-down dinner, talking stuff and going through everything. And we know that Ernie's not quite on the up and up. That's the vibe, even though he's sincere. And so the ladies, of course, do the lady thing and excuse themselves. So that way we get the guys only for a scene. They share time together in prison. So he's like, hey, what kind of racket you running on her now? So he doesn't even care that his mother-in-law, Hank, is getting worked over by the guy he was in prison with. And he's like, yeah, the last 6 months without you was pretty lonely, blah, blah, blah. I think I was going to go crazy in there. So they're acting like they're both scheming. So we know Hank, as slick as he is, professionally speaking, is a con artist. You got two con artists. A con artist knows a con artist. So this is a nice little scene because it elevates Hank by reminding us that he's not stupid. He is smart. And immediately we see that because it turns out Ernie is convincing us that, no, he sincerely loves Vivian. And that's all there is to it. Despite the fact she asked me to, take care of all her finances. Lonely old woman with a lot of money. You got to rely on somebody and all that too. We think Vivian and Norma are on the up and up, of course. But of course, Hank basically uses an opportunity to leverage him, basically saying, well, hey, and he makes this gesture when the ladies come back about the family and everything else there too. But he's basically saying, I'll tell her about your past, which she doesn't know because it's very expensive. He's looking away to, extort some money out of him. That's who Hank is. Ernie, we're not sure about, but we know he's got his history. But here's the whole point that I think makes the scene a lot better and effective what they're doing with new characters, even with old ones. It elevates both of them. It reminds us how good Hank is on his own. And here we have Ernie, a guy we've only met for a minute or two. And he actually, the way he's acting out the scenes is that he does genuinely love Vivian, even though he's got a shady past. So he's conflicted because he's trying not to let her know all the bad things because, hey, he's out of prison. He's an older guy. He's seen the light. Vivian is a catch. If you want to argue this kind of stuff, she's attractive, she's older, she's classy, she's well put together, she's got money, she seems smart, she seems down to earth, does not seem like a snob, she seems self-made, she's a unicorn when we're talking about the senior citizen population, and he seems to, as a character, know that. So it's a very good scene because, again, the women aren't even a part of it. They're there when they come back just to let the guys talk and say something where they look sinisterly at each other, kind of sort of really more Hank at Ernie. And this is why this scene works well. Whereas the last scene I mentioned before with Cooper and Truman arguing they look like two butthurt little kids is that it drags both of them down. That doesn't really raise any conflict. And that's where I say that scene didn't work and the other scene earlier. But I did like this dinner scene, even though it's small. It's establishing another way it looks like this season is going to go to. So that's why I think this episode has a lot going for it. What's your take?
Yeah, no, I do agree. Not exactly. I don't feel like Dale in the last scene was acting like he was a butthurt little kid. Harry, yeah.
Well, I will concede that. Yes, I'm just being generic, but it didn't elevate Cooper at all.
Yeah.
So this scene elevated both
Cooper
characters. That's why it's great.
He's done this kind of move before, but
yes.
Speaking about this scene in question, Hank almost totally blows it for Ernie as soon as the girls are coming out. and he starts speaking louder how all the time in the prison yards, and or you can see the panic on Ernie's face until Hank goes ahead and he toasts the newlyweds, and you absolutely feel that. I'm hoping that Ernie is a good guy, but at the same time, if he is a good guy, I feel like Hank is going to use that to his advantage, and that's worrisome. Also, before we move on, I feel like it's worth addressing. We don't know what the hell happened with Hank. Hank came in on this scene, or the last scene that he was in. We hadn't seen him since he was at gunpoint of the last remaining Renault.
Yeah, it's not much of a scene other than that. And we know that 2 days of, he says, hey, I've been gone for 40 hours. And Norman had made the comment, well, that means you're a missing person. It wasn't like you were just running late or, or on a bender or something overnight. So we don't know what's going on for 2 days. So that'll probably be something later on. So it is interesting for that, I think.
Yep. And then we get to finally move on to a lady we haven't seen in quite some time. It's been a little too long, if you ask me. We start out in Cooper's room. It's the middle of the night, and he's making another note for Diane. But then there's a knock at the door, and Audrey's there to talk to him. Asks if they arrested her father. Yeah, they did. And if her father did indeed kill Laura. But you can tell why Audrey's there. At one point, she goes ahead and she just climbs on the bed, and she's about to admit that even though she was at that lodge, nothing ever happened. When Dale gets a phone call, he picks it up. We don't get to hear the other side. He's just saying where and how long ago, and he tells Audrey to go back to bed and lock the door and to not ask any questions. We go out to the woods, and we see Dale and Harry, and they're walking, and they are led to a spot that seems familiar, honestly. It reminds me of the last time we saw someone like that there. We see Maddie's body wrapped in plastic.
This scene was done well because I think what the feeling I got was that, okay, him and Audrey are never going to hook up and get together and have this May summer romance while he's in town or whatever, even though she's legal. Whatever it is, and all that too, because you're right, she goes to the bed, but she's not doing it. She's doing it to seduce him, but she's not doing it to be overtly, come here while I take you sort of thing. She's just, whatever. And, but the way they shot the scene when he leaves and it's real urgent, and the way the camera's moving and they come up on the body, it's done very well. However, to me, based on some of the weak scenes in this episode and the fact that we kind of know who Laura's body is, this kind of felt like a wampa because yes, Maddie's played by the same actress. In this case, instead of Laura with blonde hair, she's got black hair here. Maddie, who's passed away, was a decent character. Maddie was one that saw visions as well. Laura did as well too. So looks like it could be a family thing, despite the fact that Cooper does as well, and he's not family, allegedly.
Dun, dun.
I just felt like they were rebooting the whole show again by saying, okay, now that we've let the killer out of the bag, we're going to have another dead body mystery. So I didn't like the choice here of that. I just didn't. I get it. Though I think the first one was that supposedly a beach. When we see Pete at the very first episode, when he finds her when he's fishing, and this one here is at the waterfall, which I guess is at the base of the Great Northern Hotel, just from the way it looks like it's shot. But that's how we end, and it's a nice way to end. I have no problems with them going there, but for me, the highlight of the show, it was obviously Leland Palmer and the way he was acting, just phenomenal stuff. The character, great episode, very interesting episode to me. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, but this is one of those episodes that, to me, like I said, could amount to something, but it may not. It just looks that way from an observer. But overall, I still, despite some of the knocks I've had on this episode, thought it was a very good one, very entertaining.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I definitely think that Ben, from here, is going to deal with mostly Bobby and Catherine. But I think this pretty much clears him up. I think the charge was obviously premature, and
That never happens.
yeah, Harry's gonna face the consequences of that. But I'm happy to be here in Twin Peaks, even with all the dead bodies. The body count's getting high.
Yeah, good episode. We'll see what happens going in. We're almost halfway through the second season before the long goodbye, and we get season 3 in 2017. But it's been interesting. We'll continue to see how it gets. I hear it gets crazier, but until then, I'd like to thank Pixel and everybody else listening to the broadcast here about Twin Peaks season 2, episode 8. Let us know what you think. See you next week, season 2, episode 9, and Twin Peaks. Good night. As always, stay extreme.